Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar series of 2022. Vanguard Research Group is hosting a webinar every month now until the end of the year, and we're starting off with our first webinar this May. The title is How CMHCs Can Participate in Research and Why It is Important for Clinical Practice. I'm your presenter today. My name is Marta Hauser. I'm the Director of Outreach Training and Quality Assurance at Vanguard Research Group. We will be talking today about what clinical research is and why it is important, what current obstacles to clinical research are, why it is important to conduct clinical research at community mental health centers, how work on research projects works at an agency like yours, and what are the implications for clinical practice. So we'll start off with a quote, research is the distance between an idea and its realization. So in the case of mental health that we'll be talking about mostly today, the idea is that we do research because we want to improve people's lives, and we have certain ideas of how to do so. But to bring those to realization, we need to do research to see how our ideas are working, if they are working, how they might need to be modified, who they are working for, etc. So in that sense, research is our distance between our idea of how to help our patients and bringing that into realization. So in other words, clinical research is how we systematically test new drugs or therapies or other methods of treatment, such as technologies, for example, that can improve our clients' lives. We can improve and advance those drug therapies, treatment options through research. So again, we started with a question, for example, how can I improve the quality of life of my patients? How can I reduce XYZ symptoms, etc.? We have an idea of how to do that. And we can go about that in different ways. So depending on what methods we choose, we might yield a tangible or intangible result. We might, for example, develop a new medication as a tangible result. We might create a survey and get more of an idea of what we are looking at in a certain area. But either way, we'll be contributing to solving problems for our clients. And another aspect of research is that we then share those contributions, those results with the public and try to verify them in more research studies and spread the word. Here you see some images of what might come to mind when you think of what research is. Everybody has some sort of an idea, but your ideas might actually differ. So as you can see, research could mean basic research in the lab. It could mean creating surveys or new assessment questionnaires. It could mean developing a drug, or it could mean anything in development of e-mental health, such as new treatment apps, new devices to record certain measures, etc. Vanguard Research Group mostly focuses on the last three, and I will be telling you a little bit more about those and the details of those. In general, when we conduct research, there is a certain progress where we have an idea and then develop whatever it might be, a survey, medication, etc. So we go through certain phases. And for the development of drugs, there's actually a pretty standard chart that we can look at that will explain those phases a little bit to you. So when we develop a drug, that's actually a pretty long process. As you can see, it might take 5 to 15 years even. And it starts usually with a preclinical phase where we explore a new drug and how it might work. We then get approval to test the drug with humans and move into phase 1, where we explore the safety and dosing of the drug with very few people. When we know more about that, we move into phase 2, where we explore the effectiveness of the drug. So we know the drug is safe. We know something about the dosing of the drug. So we now look at the effectiveness with more people, maybe like up to 100. Once we know more about that, we go into phase 3, where we compare the safety and effectiveness of our new drug to currently available treatments, and that we do with hundreds of people. When we have the results of that, we submit the results to the FDA for review. And once the drug is approved, there's another phase that follows, which is called phase 4, which is really kind of the long-term evaluation of the drug with a large number of patients. So this could be thousands of people, where we look at details of how the drug works, applications, etc. Now, what are current obstacles to clinical research? We see a high trial failure rate, and this is due to several factors. One of them being that we see an increasingly high placebo response, even in disorders such as schizophrenia, which might be due to the fact that oftentimes the patients that are included are not your standard patients, possibly. They might be high functioning patients. They might be just a kind of subset of the patients that you would usually see in clinical practice. We have low retention rates, meaning that clients drop out of the study before the study ends, so we don't have the end outcome. We have, for example, for schizophrenia trials, oftentimes also clients that are older, for example, around 38, 42 years old, that have been ill for a while, maybe 10 years, maybe more. So again, it's a specific population. We won't, for example, be able to test treatments in younger patients than in earlier courses of illness. And that limits our ways of looking at a new treatment. So why is it important to conduct clinical research at community mental health centers? What makes the difference? First of all, to just say in general, it's important to conduct clinical research because, as you all know, the burden of psychiatric disorders is high. It's a high personal, but also societal burden. And we all want to find treatments that work for clients, make clients feel better, and improve their lives. Community mental health centers provide a specific opportunity to test new treatments because they provide the opportunity to test those treatments in the setting where they will be eventually implemented anyway. So all the treatments that you're using were at some point evaluated in clinical trials. So if we can bring those clinical trials to community mental health centers, that would help a lot in evaluating new treatments with the patients that will be taking them in the end. So the benefits are that you have a very diverse population. So your populations have comorbidities, have real life environmental challenges, such as, they have to be able to come to the clinic, make their appointments, etc. In terms of comorbidities, for example, oftentimes in clinical trials, substance use is something that might be exclusionary, but if most of your patients actually use substances, then it would be hard to apply the results of the clinical trial that excluded those patients to your everyday patient. So if we can, again, bring trials to the patient group that will actually be using it at the end, that is beneficial to our research outcomes. You can also really, your clients, that you treat your clients every day. So you can really select those clients who are most appropriate for the trial. And also your existing relationships with those clients help in engaging the client in the trial, help in retention. So you will be following up with your client anyway, and that will help keeping the client engaged and also in the study so that we can actually follow them through the end of the study and have the outcomes needed. You also see clients earlier in their illness. You see clients that are younger. And so we can actually test treatments that would provide an opportunity to treat an earlier phase of illness and again, engage those clients in research studies. And you see location of community mental health centers here as a point, just because we try to do research with community mental health centers all across the US, some in more urban places, some in more rural places. And that might have their own challenges or advantages. For example, how easy it is for a patient to come into your clinic. And that might play a role also in different research studies that we have. For example, if you have to come into an appointment every week, that might be a challenge for some patients. And for others, it might be easier. But again, you have a wide range of clients, so we can include really everyone who in the end will be receiving those treatments. And so all these points really help facilitate the translation of findings from clinical research trials into clinical practice. Now, there are different types of research programs that we will look at. For example, there are non-medical treatment studies that investigate new types of therapies or the way a service is delivered. There's new technologies that test new apps or web-based treatment programs. There's pharmaceutical studies that test new medications. Mostly, we will be looking at phase 2 through 4 trials there. As I mentioned, we're not conducting basic lab studies. And oftentimes that will be an adjunct therapy, meaning that you will give that new medication in addition to an existing treatment or compared to an active control, meaning to an existing treatment as opposed to a placebo control. So a control where the client does not receive treatment. There's survey research that we're conducting where we gather, for example, chart data from specific populations within your clinic. And then there is complex treatment programs that combine several of those mentioned above. So it might be a program that looks at a new app plus a new medication, etc. And then we can look at different types of research programs from another angle. So when we approach you about a study, you might also hear us say that a study is observational or interventional. Both of those assess the outcome according to a specific research plan in participants. However, in an observational trial, your patient might receive an intervention or procedure as part of their care, but they're not assigned to a specific intervention that the research plan dictates. Whereas in an interventional trial, the participant is assigned to a specific intervention by the research plan. And again, the intervention can then be compared to other interventions like standard of care, could be compared to placebo technically, but again, oftentimes with our studies, that would not be the case. So how does research at community mental health centers work? Well, first and foremost, you listening to this webinar tells me that you have some interest and passion in research, which is wonderful and is always helpful. And of course, we would try to spread that excitement throughout the agency, since although you just maybe need a few engaged staff to really conduct the study, it's always helpful if everybody is on board and excited about an opportunity. And I will tell you a little bit more about the staff needs in the next slide, and also a little bit more about the infrastructure that would be needed and how that can be integrated with your established processes at your clinic. And once we have all that, of course, we need to get your patients involved and excited about the study opportunities that you offer. In terms of required staff, it will depend a little bit on the study that you choose. In general, we always are looking for a principal investigator. So that is the person who is responsible for the conduct of the study at your clinic. So that might be a physician, NP, PhD, social worker. It kind of depends again on the requirements of the study, but this is the person who will have the overall oversight. We then also typically have a research coordinator who is responsible for coordinating the day-to-day of the study, looking at patient charts, recruiting patients, collecting the data, possibly entering the data, etc. And then there might be other roles, again, depending on the type of study that you choose. For example, if it's a study on psychosocial treatment, maybe you'll need a social worker or a therapist, a case manager. If we do lab work, you might need a nurse, etc. In terms of infrastructure, you will need a room where you can see patients, where you can go over the study procedures. So an interview room, so to speak. You will need some storage to store study records, possibly also medication. If you have a pharmacy where you can store medication at your clinic, that would work too. You might need an exam room for taking vital signs, a lab if there's blood draws or other equipment. Maybe the study requires an ECG. So again, depending on the study, we will be talking about what requirements there are in terms of facilities and equipment for your agency. Vanguard Research Group can also help you a little bit with certain equipment. We'll be talking about that as we talk about specific studies. And in general, we will try to, again, integrate as much as we can. If you have a pharmacy, if you have a lab, that's great if we can use them, if those processes work. If not, we can help you set something up with an outside lab, etc. If you were wondering about the financial support, all of the research programs that we work on are sponsored in some way. Could be federal source, pharmaceutical industry source. There's different types of funding. And what they in general include is funding for a research coordinator. And then they usually have a budget that is covering research procedures with the patient that you conduct with the patient, and also a stipend for the patient. And it might cover different things, again, depending on the study. If there's other positions that need to be covered, for example, that might be in the budget as well. So this is an article. It's a little older, from 2014, which happens to be also when Vanguard Research Group was established. And the article speaks about conducting clinical research in community mental health centers and what opportunities and challenges there are. So we spoke a little bit about the opportunities, and if you read the article, you will read a little bit about the challenges. I took out the two most pronounced challenges in this article to talk about with you. And this is cited from the article. It said the most extremely burdensome activities are contract and regulatory requirements. And then that clinical research is complex, so it's often time consuming, difficult to be integrated into daily routine and such. So I'm bringing this up because this is where Vanguard Research Group comes into play. You can go out and conduct research as a community mental health center without us, absolutely. But how can we actually support you? What's the difference that we make? So basically, you see that in the images on the bottom of the slide. As you see in these quotes, research can feel like a heavy burden that you have to lift. And what we do is basically make it feel like something that you can very confidently lift. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So in terms of our services, one thing that we do that oftentimes happens before we speak to you about certain projects is that we might help develop a certain program or protocol. Sometimes, however, we have the opportunity to actually include you in that development. So we could ask you to consult on certain protocols and give us input, for example, in terms of what kind of clients you would see for a certain project, what challenges you would see with a certain project, etc. And that again is helpful to facilitate the translation from clinical research into your practice. When we have certain programs and protocols that are sponsored, we reach out to you and see what research projects you're interested in. So we send out newsletters and different communication to make you aware of the research projects that are coming up. And if you decide on a project, we will work on this together and provide what we like to call white glove service that I will talk about a little bit more in the next slide. Even if we're not working on a research project actively, we provide training and webinars like this one that you can participate in. And we facilitate professional connections between different clinics, between different professionals, depending on what your interests are and what you're looking to achieve in your clinic. So in terms of our service when we work on a project together and how we can help you lift that huge rock and make it easy to carry it in your clinic, we basically, in one word, try to take everything off your plate that we can. So before a study starts at your clinic, there is a sponsor looking for clinics to participate, and we can help you with this process of being selected for the study. So typically there is a survey that will ask a bunch of questions about your staffing, your facilities, your equipment, your training, etc. And we will try to complete this for you if we can. If we know your agency, we will be able to complete a whole lot of that and just send it to you for review and edits as needed. We'll communicate with the sponsor and we'll help you get to that first step. The next step, once you're selected for a study, is contracting and budget discussions. Again, we can help you with negotiating and with communicating about that step. The next step that you saw in the quote is the regulatory paperwork and the submissions that are needed to different review boards, etc. And again, what we will do is gather that paperwork, complete as much as we can for you so that you just have to review. We'll submit for you if we can, and monitor the whole process for you. We will help you with the trainings that are needed for the study. Maybe that is training in certain assessments or in certain procedures, and we'll be assisting you in completing those trainings and passing those trainings. We will hold regular recruitment and retention calls with your clinic, with the people working on the study, so that we can share best practices across agencies and just assist you with anything that comes up in terms of recruitment and retention. If anything is not working well, we're not getting enough clients into the study, or we have trouble with retention, we can brainstorm with you, we can find ways of how we can help you achieve your goals. Same is true for data entry and management, or just completing assessments. Oftentimes there is something that comes up out of the blue, and we're always here. You can just pick up the phone if something is unclear, if something comes up, if some system isn't working, we're kind of your point person to reach out to. So in that sense, we are, again, your connection between the project, the sponsor, the different vendors that are included in a study. And we make it easy to connect with everyone and get your answers or your problems solved. So in general, we just help you assure that the study is done the way it's supposed to be done at your clinic and successful. So who are we? Vanguard Research Group, as I mentioned, was established in 2014. We're a clinical research organization. We're conducting research with community mental health centers and academic centers that have community clinics. We started off with a certain research project that I will be talking about a little bit more in the next slide, and then grew from there to conduct quality research programs all across the US with different clients with different disorders, and are expanding from the mental health field to other fields. As I mentioned, we have different types of trials that we work on, which could be new therapies or service programs, different types of technologies and apps, or new medications. And those research programs are funded through a mix of federal and industry sponsors, and also include investigator-initiated trials, which means some investigators came together and wanted to look at a certain question, and we're looking for funding for that. So as I mentioned, initially we worked on a certain research program that was called the RAISE-ETP trial, and that took place in 34 community mental health centers across the US. So basically we went out and talked to community mental health centers to see if they're interested in research, and what we found is that community mental health centers were actually very interested in participating in research, but of course your main goal is to treat patients, so it's kind of hard to find the time and the research, the resources to seek out funding, and sometimes it can be a little bit hard to work on a research program if you're not used to what is needed, right? Again, we're back to the regulatory paperwork, etc. So it was an opportunity to do a research project for those community mental health centers and some academic sites, and was very successful. And so from there, we expanded our network from those 34 initial mental health clinics to over 150 clinics across the United States at this point. And again, we're reaching out to you all and to new agencies every day to include more people in the opportunity to bring research to your agency. So what are the clinical implications? Why are we doing this? And why is this interesting for you or important for your practice? Again, as I mentioned, the opportunity to consult on research programs and protocols will help facilitate the translation of research, of clinical research trials into clinical practice in general. And we have some examples here of the RAISE trial that I already mentioned, the Prelapse trial, and the Improving Care and Reducing Costs program that had a direct impact on how clinical practice works today. So I'll be talking a little bit more about those. The RAISE-ETP trial is an NIH-funded study that, excuse me, that was comparing comprehensive treatment program for first episode psychosis to treatment as usual. That comprehensive treatment program is called Navigate, and it included about 400 patients. And what we saw is that that kind of coordinated specialty care can be successful when delivered in community practice settings. Again, this is important, right? Because the importance of research is to bring it to the clients that will benefit from it at the end. So we found that it's actually cost effective. we found that clients felt that the treatment program is helping them, and it was actually more effective than usual treatment approaches. And it was most effective when the client had a shorter duration of untreated psychosis, which is the duration of between the beginning of symptoms to the beginning of treatment. So the direct implications were really the efforts to decrease the duration of untreated psychosis, which resulted in a lot of outreach and awareness programs about psychosis, and the development of manuals, videos, and training materials for community mental health centers on how to introduce the Navigate program into their practice, as well as specialized clinics that provide the treatment. Now, the other trial I mentioned was the Prelapse trial, the prevention of relapse and schizophrenia trial. And that was a study that looked at the use of long-acting injectables in early psychosis, so in patients that were sick for less than 5 years, versus treatment as usual, and included 39 clinics across the US. There were clinics that were trained in the use of long-acting injectables in that patient group, and clinics that treated patients as usual in the clinic. The clinics that were trained in the use of LAIs were trained, for example, in the rationale for the use of a long-acting injectable in early psychosis, in shared decision-making and communication strategies to bring this up with patients, including role-playing, for example, to develop those skills, and overcoming logistical barriers. And what we found was that time to hospitalization was significantly delayed in the clinics and in the patients that were using long-acting injectables. And again, the important implication here is that long-acting injectables were rarely used in early phase schizophrenia. So we were able to document that in community treatment settings, the accessibility of treatment with long-acting injectables in early phase schizophrenia patients is actually high, and that it can actually help delay onset of a new hospitalization. So what are the benefits of joining our Vanguard Research Group network? First, of course, we spend a lot of time talking about joining research projects and how we can help you with that. And as I mentioned, there's also the benefit of receiving a variety of training on different clinical processes and assessments, clinical standard interviews, and things like that. You will also have access to new medicines or new treatment initiatives. And again, there's financial support for all these research studies, so there's no cost to you to join our network or to join a research study. You'll have access to experts in the field. And again, we want to support your goals of treating your patients and bringing innovative treatment options to your patients, and there's no cost for you. So I'll talk about some upcoming projects that we have. One is a study involving an FDA-approved medication and a digital app for adjunctive treatment of major depressive disorder. We also have a study coming up on a novel pharmacological treatment option for acute agitation in schizophrenia and bipolar disorder that will be used in crisis stabilization units, or PsychERs. And we also are looking at 2 other new apps. One app will be tracking health measures to kind of advise clinical care in mood disorders and in psychosis. And the other one is looking at a treatment for major depressive disorder. So if you're interested in any of those projects, they are going to be starting soon. You can let us know if you're interested. I'll be happy to tell you more details and talk to you about how these will work and what you will need and what they entail exactly. So you can contact us in different ways. You can go to vanguardresearchgroup.com. That's our website, and you will be able to find me on that website. There's different ways of contacting us. Pretty easy. There's a contact us button basically anywhere you click. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook for updates. And I hope you enjoyed this webinar. We will have our next webinar in June, end of June, and we'll dive more into the details of studies. Then we'll look at different committees that a study entails, different processes, etc. So I'll be sending out information on that, and I will stop the recording at this point and open the floor to questions. Thank you so much.